Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Tandy from Silver Sands, and welcome to our webinar on the 5 M's of digital skills development. In this webinar, we'll explore how you can use the 5 M's of digital skills development to improve collaboration and communication, which in turn fuels a greater productivity and improved profitability for your businesses. Before Linda dives into that subject, I'll kick off with a Silver Sands introduction. Okay, so we've been in business for 34 years and we're a professional services organisation specialising in Microsoft consultancy and support to the enterprise market. We focus on the following areas. So at the heart of what we do is people and devices. We deliver Microsoft approved user adoption and change management to embed the technology within your organisation and turn drive those efficiencies through your business. At the top, the larger circle is Microsoft 365, which comprises of 3 key components. Firstly, it's the Office 365 applications like Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. The second component is Windows 10 for your operating system. And the third component is Enterprise Mobility and Security, EMS, for your managing your endpoints and devices. So the circle at the bottom left, the big circle there, is the Power Platform, where we've seen a lot of rapid growth for business applications, reporting and dashboards using Power Apps, Power Automate and Power BI. And at the bottom right, we deliver and manage both on-prem infrastructure and cloud infrastructure solutions using Microsoft Azure. The smaller circles in between, so it's the governance, security and identity, help are kind of crucial aspects of a technical implementation, and they enable a seamless and protected end user experience. And then linking all of those circles together is our support banner. So we offer anywhere from the break fix support through to the proactive support, all the way to that managed service where our support desk becomes an extension of your support desk. And that's Silver Sands in a nutshell. So I'd like to welcome Linda, our adoption and change management practice lead, to kick off the webinar. Linda, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. So just a reminder, if you've got any questions, please pop them into the chat box and we can either pick them up as we go along. Mike will let me know if there are any questions there, or I will pick them up at the end of the session when we've finished the broad bulk of what we're going to talk about today. So we're here to talk about the 5 M's of digital skills development. And the reason we're talking about that is this concept called the digital skills gap. And that is the distance between the current and required skill levels, which is a global issue. And it's a challenge that many governments have striven to address for years. And this last 12 months, the pandemic, has simply served to both highlight the size of the gap and intensify its impact. And before March 2020, it was estimated in the UK that around 16% of the whole population, the UK population, which was roughly 9 million people, were unable to access the internet without assistance. And up to 22% lack the digital skills required just for everyday life, the things that we take for granted, like online banking, for example, or sending emails or communicating in a digital environment. And of course, those two facts impact in the workplace, because that 22% of people are almost certainly employed somewhere by someone. And one of the things that came out of the March 2020 study was that around 5.9 million people were unable to turn on a device when they worked from home. That, of course, has almost certainly changed, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to the research as that develops going forwards from now. But of course, businesses and organisations now have this really unique opportunity to help narrow that global digital skills gap. And that's by providing digital skills development for all their employees. And in so doing, they can boost their own productivity at the same time as benefiting their wider community. So it would be fair to say that since last March, the way that we work has fundamentally changed forever. And nearly all today's employees use some sort of digital technology to a greater or lesser extent. And their experience of that at work is going to be dictated by many different things, not least how they engage with apps and content, and the modern digital experience, which Microsoft 365 supports and enables across the entire workforce, will allow them to work productively and purposefully. But of course, that's only if they have the digital skills in order to be able to engage in that way. And at the same time, conventional wisdom holds that companies are dependent on their best people. But actually, with the bulk of the global workforce on the front lines in some way, this is changing. And organisations will now stand or fall based on the performance of the typical employee, not just the strongest performers at head office. So the question for you then becomes, how do you build teams and engage staff in a way that embraces all of that new reality? And of course, at the same time, work from anywhere is here to stay for many office workers. And we need to find a way that helps the whole workforce, not just the office workers, to be truly flexible at the same time as digitally enabling all your essential employees too. And how well you do that is going to be an absolutely crucial determining factor in whether your company thrives and survives going forward. So why does this matter? Well, the workplaces that we know are fluid and dynamic. They're in constant motion, even though sometimes it doesn't feel that way. And if you think back maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, many of the workplace activities that we did then are redundant now. And new ones have risen to take their place. As markets and customer needs change, products and services that you sold back then are now will have changed significantly at the same time. And even in the lowest level jobs on the factory floor, the retail space or that packing plant, replacing someone who knows the company, understands the processes and procedures, and as a result can do the job quickly and efficiently with someone new, can cost thousands in training and lost productivity. So reducing the churn in terms of staff moving and leaving organisations will make a big difference to your bottom line. But of course, that's not all there is to think about, because losing that internal knowledge and expertise is something you'll never get back when staff leave. New staff might learn the job, but they won't have the history that often goes along with why a process is the way it is. And if they're in roles where politics play a part, they'll need to take time and energy that could have gone into doing the job to build the connections and networks that they'll need to navigate successfully through the company going forward. And of course, it's not just about the skills, much as we would like to think it is. I've talked to lots of client companies over the last few months, well, over the last 12 months in particular, as we've been working on initially rapid deployment of teams in order to meet an immediate need that was driven by lockdown, the first lockdown, never mind the two that have come on since. And that need was being able to maintain your workforce in a way that enables the business to carry on running. And what most companies focused on was they focused on just the skills and just the applications. And what they forgot in that race to get into Teams was that many employees didn't have devices. So some of the client companies that we worked with were in a race to buy up those last remaining laptops. I don't know whether you can remember back this time last year, but at one point there were no laptops to be had anywhere in the UK. It was almost impossible to track them down, so that they could give those laptops to their employees so that they could work from home. And that was just the office workers. And pretty much every employee, doesn't matter who they are or where they are in the organization, at some point they are going to need to use some sort of a device to do some part of their work. Now that could be as simple as e-learning, or it could be as complex as managing a process on a production line, or it could be completing a timesheet. So making sure that staff have the devices available to them is a key part of that digital skills gap and that digital enablement piece that we need to take into account. It isn't just about people being able to use a keyboard and a mouse. It's them being able to access the internet in the first place. And of course, as we've seen with many of the schools, where those pupils who were in digitally disadvantaged families suffered because often the only digitally enabled device in their home was one mobile phone. So it meant that those children couldn't keep up with their schoolwork and they fell behind because they weren't in the classroom. So digital accessibility is bigger than skills. But of course, skills is a core component of making sure that what works in your organization is going to work in the long term. And there are lots of statistics, there's lots of research, there's lots of reports out there, and I've included a number of them in the infographics and ebooks that you can download from our website. But this one from the McKinsey survey in 2018 has always stood out to me over the last couple of years. And it stands out not because of the numbers that are stated, around 16% of organizations successfully managing digital transformation. It's the 70 to 80% that aren't managing it. And this survey also pointed to the fact that just because some companies exist in the digital space, they're digital companies, they're providing digital products and digital services, they didn't actually do that much better than the 16% of those that managed transformation. In that digital space, only 26% of those companies were able to say that they had actually improved their performance through a digital transformation program in any sustainable way. And what that points to is that there's a big gap, as we've already discussed, there's a big gap between giving people the tools and saying, here you go, here's Teams, have an online meeting, or share a file in OneDrive or Teams, or co-author in that space. There's a big gap between just giving people the tools and actually giving them both the confidence and the ability to use them. And that ability is not just vested in skills, it's vested in access to the devices and the tools to start with. So how does this gap, this digital skills gap show up? Well, I've got some suggestions here, and these are just a few of the things that have come out from the conversations that I've had with clients over the year, particularly over the last year. But these have shown up over the long term as well. And perhaps the classic and the most impressive, or the one that has the biggest impact, is the fact that with the best will in the world, most organizations just implement the technology. So they throw out Teams. This was classic at the beginning of last year. They throw out Teams, and there is an assumption that staff will A, know how to use it, and B, will want to use it. And to some extent, it was forced because people moved into meeting modes. But it's entirely possible that if you go back and you have a look at the productivity score that will be sitting in the admin reporting panel of your tenancy, that actually meetings is possibly the only thing that Teams is being used for, or the predominant thing that Teams is being used for. Which begs the question of what else are they doing? And in most cases, they're not using it because they prefer to do what they've always done, which is just normal human behavior. And we see that in the second one, where even after Teams has been rolled out, there's still an enormous reliance on Outlook email internally within an organization. Externally, that's fine. That's a common form of communication that we're all used to. But what you should expect to see, if you do this right, is your use of internal email dropping. And that's what we measured when we did the Teams rapid deployment programs. In one organization, we saw internal email drop by 18% in just 1 month. And that's been sustained over the 12 months because we're still working with that organization. And we've seen similar drops in internal email with the other organizations that we've worked with, where we've been doing an adoption-led transformation program rather than an application-led transformation program. But what you'll still find in most organizations is that even where levels of chat go up, levels of internal email can remain the same or even become higher. And the reason for that is because people do a belt and braces approach. I'm not sure if Mike or Tim or Tom has seen my message in chat, so I'm just going to send them an email as well. And I had to laugh when one chief technology officer said to me back in March last year, he said, "I think chat is brilliant. It's just an amazing tool. I told my team in chat that we were going to have a meeting, and then it meant that when I sent the email with the meeting details to them, they all read it." And he didn't see the irony in what he was saying. Fortunately, that has shifted completely in the 12 months since, but I still occasionally remind him of that when he's concerned about some of his employees or new starters not coming along for the ride and not joining in the general movement towards working in a digital environment. And then, of course, we see number 3 here, where getting to the documents that people need is not as easy as it can seem. And that often occurs because most organizations don't follow a simple principle, which is if you move a document from your local storage into Teams or OneDrive, you delete the original. You don't keep it just in case. It gets deleted, because now you're enabled to work with a single version of the truth. And that single version of the truth should be a single file that everybody either reads and or works on together. Where confusion happens is where these simple principles, like deleting something that's been moved online, haven't been adopted as a general practice across the organization. So people might be working within multiple Teams workspaces, and each Teams workspace has a different approach according to whoever owns it. They set the standard for their Teams workspace because there is no company-wide approach to how you use these services or to what underpins them. So files end up in multiple locations, here, there, and everywhere. And finally, of course, the gap shows up in, well, we enable Teams, but we don't know whether it actually works or not. We don't know whether it's created any sort of an impact in the company. We don't know whether it's transformed what we do, although we all have meetings in Teams. So clearly it's had some impact. But the value of a suite like Microsoft 365 lies not in its ability to have a meeting online. It lies in its ability to move an organization from being a document-led and siloed in its knowledge, where things are held in one place, to being a knowledge-led organization, where information and processes and practices become more visible and more transparent across the entire organization. And in that space, you get the visibility of true transformation. So how do these 5 M's of mine help? Well, the 5 M's are motivation, model, meaning, mindset, and meme. And they help organizations by creating a structure that can be used to both plan, progress, measure, and ultimately close that skill gap. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at each of these 5 M's now and talk to you about how I think they support companies moving forwards in this space. So the first one that we have is motivation. And the motivation to change always has to start with a goal. Now, it would be fair to say that with Microsoft 365 and Office 365, the primary motivation to change pre-2020 was a licensing issue. Companies were coming to the end of their life around their basic desktop applications of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and needed to either replace the licenses for those items or move into Microsoft 365. Or there were other licensing issues around Windows, for example, with the same issue. So it makes sense from a licensing perspective to move into that model because you know that you're not going to be under licensed, which was always a risk when you had desktop licensing. And that's been predominantly a major driver for moving into the Microsoft 365 space. And then 2020 hit, the pandemic came along. And all of a sudden, these license changes that had been there simply to meet a licensing need, it suddenly became apparent that this would meet an additional need. And the additional need would be allowing a company to carry on working, even though staff were working remotely and working from home. But that's not really a good enough motivation. Responding to a pandemic is an immediate need. It's an emergency, but it's not a long-term motivation to induce long-term transformation and change, because as we've seen, pretty much Teams is used for meetings across the board globally. The use of it in terms of supporting a collaborative culture and workspace is much less than it could be. So to understand motivation, you need to think about what will good look like to your organization. And I've got some suggestions here. So of course, the one in the red is meeting the immediate emergency need. And that is about ensuring business continuity. Yep, everyone who's working from an office can work from home. We don't need to worry about the lockdowns, because we know our staff who are sitting behind making sure that the internal processes and procedures work are able to carry on doing the job that they need to do. Doesn't necessarily meet the need for your essential workers, but it does meet the need for the office workers. It might be that you see large amounts of churn in terms of staff turnover, and you want to reduce staff turnover. And as we saw from that LinkedIn report, the 2019 Workforce Learning Report, over 60% of staff would stay with their current employer if only they invested in their learning and development. So that can have a significant impact on reducing staff turnover. You might want to increase productivity, and that might be productivity in terms of lost time. Trying to find documents could just be a really simple example of where productivity could be impacted. Another example might be in improved decision making or faster decision making, because everyone can work together in a collaborative space instead of passing emails backwards and forwards and waiting for a reply before the next thing that they needed to do gets done. Or it might be about improving financial security. And let's face it, 2020 has given the perfect excuse to look at that estate rationalization project that you might have been thinking about for the last 5 years. And maybe it was somewhere in your strategic plan to do that, but it feels too difficult. It feels too hard because there are too many moving parts to deal with in order to be able to get rid of head office or satellite offices. And that's just one area of financial security. And what about improving customer service? Now, my husband works for one of the big banks. And when the pandemic hit in March, they had a call centre an external call centre out of the UK, and that had to close because of the lockdown in the country in which it was situated. And that meant that there was a huge issue for that bank in terms of dealing with customer calls. And they took roughly 6 months to bring everything back into the UK, to enable their systems and the workforce to work both remotely from home and remotely in branch. I know that sounds a bit odd, but they're not branch workers. They're on the phones dealing with the customer servicing. And they've now got hybrid staff who are working for them, who work some of their time in branch and some of the time on the phones. But they've essentially brought their call centre back into the UK, and it's staying in the UK. It's not going to go back. The call centre that's outside of the UK is being repurposed. Nobody has lost their jobs, but it's being repurposed to deal with other areas of the business. And the call centres are now remotely managed across the entirety of the workforce throughout that bank's network in the UK. And they've got the calls down and the call wait times down to just a couple of minutes. So they've really improved their customer service by investing in the technology, like the device I have in front of me. So their staff now all have laptops. By investing in the skills, so all of the staff are getting regular training and they have time out to do training. They're allowed to do the training. It's all online or remote, like webinars, sort of the thing that I'm doing at the moment. And they have time to ask their colleagues as well. So improving customer service can be a significant driver in understanding what your motivation is for building your digital skills base within your company. The next of my M's is the model. And of course, a model is about demonstrating how you want things to be going forwards. And models allow you to do things like asking what if questions, testing the assumptions, and thinking about what else needs to change. And if we take that customer service example that I gave before, what does excellent customer service look like to you and to your organization? Have you ever broken it down? Have you ever thought about how that pans out, how that plays out throughout the organization? Because customer service isn't just about the people on the phone or at the front end, behind the retail desk, or on the packing floor, the packing plant. Customer service relies on every part of the organization playing its part correctly. So in a simple environment, it might be making sure that people have access to the right information through the right tool at the right time in order to be able to give a speedy response to a customer. And to underpin that, you need to think about who's providing the information, when it's going to be needed, who's authorizing it, where it's stored, and how do the people that need to get to it access it. Those two things can't be separated out. And I had an experience last year, right at the beginning of the first lockdown, of ordering, because that was what we were supposed to do, from a well-known high street brand, some foods. And I got my order slipped through, and then nothing. I heard nothing from customer service. And 6 weeks later, I eventually resorted to Facebook and Twitter to make a complaint, and I still heard nothing. By 8 weeks, I was on LinkedIn and messaging the finance director directly to ask him where my order was and why no one was responding. 2 days later, the order arrived, and at the same time, I got a refund for what I'd paid. I wasn't expecting the refund. I was expecting the order. But you don't want customers having to resort to those methods in order to be able to get a response out of you. That company's Trustpilot score was through the floor at the time. And when I ended up on Facebook and Twitter, all I could see was complaint after complaint after complaint. And whilst I will still use the store to shop in because I like the products that they sell, the foods that they sell, I will never order from them online again. So if they choose to go to an online only mode, they'll have lost a customer because that poor experience really impacted on me as the end user. So how does something like your model of good customer service work in your organization? My next M is meaning. And meaning is about understanding what matters. Because you can only understand what matters if something can be measured and demonstrate some change over time. And it also allows you to think about what people need to know and when they need to know it. Now, one of the activities that we do with a lot of the clients that we work with is a benefits realization exercise. And it's right at the front of any of the engagements that we do from a user adoption perspective. And this is about setting Microsoft 365 in the context of the strategic aims of the organization so that we have that clear motivation. We understand what the model is, and now we can think about how we will know that we've achieved a goal. And we do that through meaning. So, for example, in that benefits realization exercise, we will work with a company to understand what their motivation is, to identify just one or two success criteria that are not about the technology. It's not about the technology. It's not about getting 1,000 people onto Teams. In this case, it's about people being more efficient and effective because they've always got the right information. When we know what that success criteria is, we can set some goals for it. So goals might be being able to easily and quickly find the right document, that it's available in the right location, that they understand which of the tool set to use and when to use them, and that they're confident about getting rid of information when they no longer need it. Together with a whole set of other goals, this is just a subset taken out for the purposes of this webinar. Once we have a set of goals, we can think about, well, how are we going to measure progress? What are the metrics going to look like so that we can build those metrics into the whole of the adoption program? So it might be, well, how many people call the service desk internally? It might be how many people are calling customer service when they could have self-served because the information was available on the website, or because you were sending out timely reminders to customers about when to expect their order, for example. It might be things like the reduction in number of files or reports of time saved. Those are the metrics that we know we want to look at. But where do we get those from? And that's where the source of metrics comes in. And that might be service desk reports. It might be impact and satisfaction surveys. It could be the usage metrics. If you look in the admin panel of the tenancy that you have, you will find things like the productivity score. as well as just the basic usage metrics. And it might be feedback coming from other sources. So one of the things that is measured all the time within the banking industry is the NPS score. And that is customers giving a value to the bank that they are working with around the service that they've had. So that might be a key source of your metrics. If you can get that down, you know that your model is working and you're measuring it because you've got all of these other elements in place. But of course, to get to that point, we've got to have a workforce who is willing to change. And that's where your mindset, your organizational mindset comes in. And over the last couple of months, I've had conversations with client companies who have recognized, just through the discussions and the conversations that we've had about the motivation for change, that actually they have no culture of collaboration within the organization. And simply recognizing that makes it easier to think about how are we going to address that fundamental issue, because that's not about technology. It's not about devices. It's about whether people want to work together instead of keeping everything siloed. And uncovering those mindsets is really important to being able to make sure that any activity you put into developing the skills around Microsoft 365 is going to work. Because if you don't address them, they're going to undermine your activities, because people will carry on doing what they've always done just because they can, and they haven't got a good enough reason to change because you haven't helped them to see that. And getting to that point, understanding mindset, is often as simple as asking. And one of the things that we do with all of the companies that we work with are knowledge and learning surveys that are designed right at the beginning of a piece of work to understand not only what people know, but also what they use and what their attitudes are to what they're using. And that helps us to identify with our client companies where we need to focus the attention. Because again, it's not on how to use Teams for a Teams meeting. It's on why to use Teams for a Teams meeting and what type of meeting will meet the need that you've got. Because let's face it, not all meetings in Teams are equal. My final M is the meme. And a definition of a meme is that it's an element of culture or system of behavior passed from one individual to another by imitation or non-genetic means. In other words, it's attitudes, it's that mindset, it's that culture. And understanding the memes that both pervade in the mindset is crucial. Creating new memes, new ways of thinking about things is absolutely essential. And you can do that with things as simple as infographics, or with core messaging, or with statements. One of the ones that I use with a lot of companies, and I'm getting them into it, is it's not a race to fill the space. And the reason I use that phrase is because everyone assumes they need to keep everything, and they don't. So when we're talking about it's not a race to fill the space, just because you have a whole load of storage space for files doesn't mean to say that you have to keep them all. And of course, once you've thought about your 5 M's, then you can begin planning with confidence, and you'll know it will work. And your planning and your process and your implementation can be by application. So you could start with Teams. It could be by a strategic need, like a remote workforce. It could be by an underlying issue, like my high street retailers' customer service or lack thereof. Or it could just simply be by choice. Where do you want to start and why? And I'd now like to hand over back to Mike.
Thank you, Linda. So I thought that was fantastic, really informative. I like the bits around the measuring and the meaning behind the success criteria. I think a lot of people just roll out the technologies and forget there's a lot that goes behind there in terms of the planning and defining of that service to make it land a little bit better into the organisation. So just to highlight, we do offer a free knowledge and readiness audit report. This session, attending the session will entitle you to a free hour with Linda over a virtual coffee to discuss your needs within your context. So following the discussion, you'll also get a document which summarises the findings and the next steps to get you started on this journey. So all you need to do is tick the box on the survey and then we'll be in touch to arrange those sessions. So I'll just drop the link to that into the chat now. It's also got a link to future events, and if you've liked what you've seen today, there's a whole series of events all around the Microsoft stack, any of the areas that we cover from the slide which I introduced the session with this morning. And please feel free to share this internally. If there's anyone else that can benefit from attending these sessions, the more the merrier. So that link is now in the chat box. I'd like to hand back to Linda to field any questions, and then we can take it from there. Thank you, Linda.
So hi, I am open for business for questions. So is there anything in the chat area, Mike?
So there was one that came direct. So are the 5 M's linear? So does the customer have to follow them all in order?
No. Oh, ish, I think is probably a better answer to that. And that is that it makes sense to really understand why you want to change something, what it is about the digital skills and where your digital skills gaps lie that you want to change. So starting with your motivation at a strategic level always makes sense. The other 5 can actually be flexible in terms of where you start and where you end, but you're going to have to address all 5 of them at some point right at the beginning of a digital transformation program and a skills development program, because they're all going to add grist to the mill and provide some additional information about what's going to work and why going forward when you come into the practical planning and delivery of it.
Fantastic, thank you for that. One more question that's come in. How do the 5 M's fit into other change management models?
Oh, that's a really good one, because there are lots of change management models. But I guess when it comes to Microsoft 365, the primary change management model that most organizations use is ADKAR, and that's because that's the one that's preferred by Microsoft. And for those of you who are change managers who know the model, the ADKAR model, you'll know that the ADKAR model starts with 2 things, awareness and then desire. And if you like, the 5 M's can actually really help to understand the awareness and then the desire aspect of the ADKAR model right at the front end. So they can help you set the scene for that, rather than doing what normally happens with ADKAR, which is we're going to roll out Teams. So our first awareness thing is just to make everyone aware that we're starting with Teams. You take it, they allow you to take it back a step and to put it into a much more strategic context, which ADKAR development and delivery can often miss.
Brilliant. I think that answers that very, very nicely. Thank you, Linda. I can't see any other questions, so unless anyone else has got any, Feel free, if you don't have any questions straight away, but you have some later on, pop them in the survey feedback or comments, or message us directly. So a copy of this will be sent out after the webinar and be emailed out to you all. But other than that, we've just got one more person typing, but other than that, thank you very much, Linda, for your time, and we hope you all have a lovely day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks, Jerry.
It's good to not see you. I couldn't see anybody on the call, by the way, because I'm sat behind my presenter screen and looking at the two things together. So,
Thanks, Robert.
so thank you very much for coming along.
Absolutely cool, and some great feedback coming in there, Linda.
Fabulous.
Thanks, Kira. That's brilliant. Okay, and we'll pop off. Thank you, Linda, and we'll speak to you all soon. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.